Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Planning on going to college? Well, first listen to the guest, Justin and James Duncombe. Justin and James, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Now, you guys are the experts, and I have a ton of questions for you today on going to college. But my first question is, when do people start planning for this? I have a grandson. He's 4 years old. Is that too early?
No, actually, this is Jim. And no, you want to start as early as you possibly can. It's like anything. I mean, you're going to spend in college up to the amount of money that you spent for the first 18 years raising that child. So how soon do you start? You start putting it away. The question really is understanding how they're going to look at you financially, so you put the money away in the appropriate manner so you can maximize your financial aid when the student actually applies their senior year of college, senior year of high school, rather.
And now, of course, I was kidding about I do have a grandson, but he's 4 years old, but I would assume for most people, they come to you or start looking for advice kind of at either junior high or freshman year. Would that be correct?
Oh, we wish. Unfortunately, it's closer to junior or senior year of high school. We do presentations at high schools on the topic that the book covers. And every single time it's the seniors that are the most prolific in coming. Then it's juniors. Only a couple sophomores show up, and freshmen are almost never there. Whereas we really would prefer them to start in, junior high school, but we're Americans. You procrastinate.
You're very understanding. Now, I've gone through your book, and really I find it fascinating. And to our audience, I would almost challenge you, if you can go through this book and not save money, you're probably in a very unique class of about 2 or 3 people in the whole country, because there's so many good tips. And of course, just following one page of advice in your book, someone could save $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And that might even be on the low end. And would you agree?
I would agree. In fact, there was a woman who recently spoke to us. When you're filling out the financial aid applications, for instance, they ask very specific questions about what you have from income and assets. And she had been to a presentation, forgot some of the things that she needed to know, and she put one asset down in the wrong spot. It cost her about $20,000 in 1 year. So, they're making simple mistakes and learning from the book to be able to not make those mistakes is something that can really benefit someone.
And sadly, I'm just thinking, probably next to a house, a college education is probably our second biggest expenditure. And you guys would probably know that better than I.
In today's dollars, it's about $270,000 if you look at 4 years of education at a top end school. But anybody that pays that kind of money, there's only 3% of our population that can afford to pay that outright. And so that's kind of what we deal with, is helping everybody else understand how to maximize your financial aid. Understand the finances, understand how the schools are going to give you free money.
Because when you put that cost into perspective, that's the list price. But let's say you take that exact price from a private school and now you make it a real person with an income of $100,000. It's no longer $75,000. The school's only going to charge you $5,000, maybe $10,000. So what the school actually charge you relative to their list price varies drastically from the actual price they're saying they're going to charge versus the one you actually pay.
Already you're making me feel better, and I think our audience also. What are the most common myths and misconceptions that when people come into you, you find, 8 out of 10 times or 3 out of 5?
The most common myth is actually that schools are universally expensive. And so, as I just mentioned, if you have an income of $100,000, many private schools are $10,000 or less. When you account for how much it costs to have a student living at home, which costs about $8,000 to $10,000 a year for most families, and then you're trying to send them to community college or state school, heck, sending a kid away to private school with an income like that is actually cheaper. It's going to cost you less. So what the realities are on cost is probably the number one misconception. The second one is college is universal. Everyone should go to college. Only about 40% of the U.S. population gets a bachelor's or better. And right now there are millions of jobs that are open for jobs that require technical and vocational degrees that people completely disconsider because they think they're a job that is not very sophisticated or isn't going to earn them a lot of money, when in reality, you can come out of a lot of those jobs earning $80,000 to $100,000 a year. So whether it's everyone should go to college, which for some jobs, it's absolutely necessary. For some careers, it's absolutely necessary, as well as the cost side of things. There's good misconceptions right off the bat on both sides.
If someone is listening, is there a preferred group that we want to be in? Do we want to be making $10,000 a year, or do we want to have a house and be making? I mean, obviously, we can't change our lifestyle that quickly. But is there one group that you might say they think they're in the loser group, and yet they're perfectly ideal because they're making below the average income or just a little above?
If a family is making, say, less than 20, the cost of most private schools is going to be the same or less than a local community college or a state school, especially when you get down towards, let's say you're talking about the median American income at $61,000 or less. When you start getting below that income, you start qualifying for federal and state assistance. And at that point, those federal assistances will pretty much let you pay, in most cases, for community colleges and state schools for free. So the more disadvantaged a family is when it comes to college anyway, the more advantages you have to take advantage of, whether it's the state incentives, the federal incentives, all those things come into play. And all the way up for the private schools, all the way up to about 120, you're still getting insanely high degrees of assistance from the school. But even if you're making 170, you're still talking about a price tag of about 20 to 30. So, and that's at one of these private schools. And there's 138 schools on the list that I'm thinking of. It's not just the Ivy Leagues. There's a lot of other private schools around the country that work like that. And so even at an income that's in the high 100s, you're still qualifying for substantial levels of aid that make a state school similar in price. And we even have clients that have gone into the 2s and 300s, but when they start having multiple kids in school, your contribution to college divides by the number of kids you send. So even if you're making 200 grand, it's as if you're making 100 grand per kid and you still qualify for aid.
You're giving us a lot of good news, and that's great, because I'm sure a lot of people, and unfortunately, as they're getting close to college, meaning the parents or the person who's going to be paying, whether they have a business reverser or a little blip on the screen, and they've worked hard all their life to provide for their son or daughter, and now they're saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose out, or I don't even have that option. And you're telling us there's a lot more there than we think of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there is. The other thing is, too, is if you look at low-income families, so if you make less than $35,000 taxable income, for example, you're going to get the government subsidy. It's about $5,800, and community college is running about $4,000 to $5,000. So that's paid for. And they take states like California, which has Cal grants, and you can make up to $60,000, $65,000, and you're getting Cal grants. So now you're going to a Cal State school, that runs $34,000 a year, and between those two, you already got almost a free education. So low income in the United States is already a free education. So there's a lot of advantages to low-income people.
Now, one of the things, again, this is overwhelming to most of us, and people, our listeners, are getting hit with a lot. But where would you tell someone to start? And I'm going to do a typical scenario and say, let's say this is that good parent who freshman year they're getting started because they want to take a look at it and they've heard stories. How do they start planning for college at that point?
Well, not to have a shameless plug, but I would say the first thing you should do is buy the book so you have some.
I was going to say that too, but I wanted to leave it for you to say it. And when you say the book, what book is that?
That's College Bound Strategies by Justin.
Who's the author?
Duncombe. Justin Duncombe.
All right. That's the book we want our audience to get out there and get. But after they've done that and they still have some questions, what's next?
The next thing is probably work with your community counselor at the high school. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to put the student on the best track for success when it comes to picking the different classes. For instance, one of our good friends, one of his kids had a kind of interesting issue where he kind of had to get the kid up every morning, get him to school, had to make sure that he wasn't changing his classes to easier stuff so he had a better qualification going to college. So that's on the extreme end of someone who isn't very motivated. For those that are motivated, picking those right educations, making sure you're choosing challenging classes that will show good on your college resume, all that stuff starts in year one. So starting with your guidance counselor to give you good tips on the types of classes you should take, the types of extracurricular you should be involved in, because it's not just your grades and your test scores, it's what you do outside of the classroom that also counts. What volunteerism, leadership, sports, all these clubs that you can be in, all those things can contribute to how the school will look at you and whether they'll accept you. And so you can start working with your counselor on day one on how those things are looking.
And I would say, which is good for the student to figure out first, and the parents, is a college education really what you should pursue? And if it is, then I would suggest that people take a look at finding the field of interest. All these high schools have programs like Naviance and some others that do an assessment that tells you what your aptitudes are towards, and then take a look at those and then do some job shadowing. If you say, hey, I'm interested in, and we had one person that was interested in working at CSI. Well, guess what? When they saw the first dead burned body, that went out the window. Okay. We just had a student last year. Turned out, they really wanted to do aviation, and turned out they get airsick. So you got to really kind of do a little bit of homework first. And once you've understood that, then you can start planning towards if the student should go to it as a trade school, right? And then move on from there. I think the next important thing is understand how the schools are going to look at you financially. So if I understand that, then I know where my assets have to be. I know what I can do. I kind of got an idea what the schools will give me for free aid, because that's put out on their websites every year. So there's a lot of different things to start prepping. And then obviously the more time you have, the better off you are.
Yeah. And that's why I mentioned the book, because in the beginning of the book, kind of like I've done here, the book starts out with a lot of different income examples to give a family ideas of what different types of schools will cost. Schools that are private, that are very popular, but they may not be like an Ivy League level, what the Ivy League level and similar schools will charge, as well as the state. It gives those kind of perspectives, so that way a family can make a better education choice, because there's a lot of families that will disconsider certain types of schools, even though it may be the ideal school for the student, because they think they can't afford it, when in reality they might be able to.
Justin and Jim, before we go further, I'd like our audience to know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guests today are Justin Duncombe and Jim Duncombe. Justin is the author of College Bound Strategies, and we would like to know from you, one, is there a website where we can find out more, and where can we get the book?
Yeah, the website is collegeboundstrategies.com. I also have a Facebook page where you can find a lot of similar information, facebook.com/collegeboundstrategies. And the book is available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's digital and print copies. I also designed the book with a note space in the back. So as you're reading and you find things that you may want to take notes, or you want to create your own timeline, there's actually a note space in the physical version for you to be able to write in the book.
And for our audience, Justin and Jim's name is spelled Duncombe. So if you're looking for the book, they are the author. We'll give you all this information again later in the show, but I would strongly advise to get it down. You, your sister, your neighbor is going to start talking to you about this, and you're going to say, I heard that the other day on a station. What were those guys' names? What was the book? The book is College Bound Strategies. Just write it down, because you will want it, and it will save you a great deal of money. Gentlemen, a few years ago, I worked for a company that actually gave out scholarships and wanted to do this to help the workers. They offered a scholarship. They had 1,400 workers. And how many applied?
None. One.
We got one. But the negative to the company was, it was an officer of the company. They did not, this was supposed to be for the rank and file.
Yeah.
They didn't, but they had to give it because they only had one applicant. So the officer's child, who the officer was making obviously a very good living, but got a very nice addition to their college fund, and simply because they put their name in the match, and whether their essay was the best or the worst, when there's only one, you got to be the winner. And I think that happens more often than, at least I've been on a few committees where we kind of wonder, why don't people apply? So I would think there's a lot of extra money hanging around out there.
There is. But a lot of this free money you hear about too, from special needs and things like that, it only makes up 4% of the contribution. So people have to be aware the schools are going to be the major contributor beyond the parents in order to pay for college. And when you asked earlier about one of the pitfalls, two of them. One is people don't fill out the financial aid application because they think I make too much money and won't get help. And that's an error. And then you have other people that say, well, I'm need-based already, and they'll just know that. Well, they don't know that. You got to fill that out. You got to fill out that FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. And so you do that, it gives you an idea. So those are two other major pitfalls, which we are amazed about, but that's what goes on.
But to circle back to your scholarship question, as Jim was saying, those kinds of scholarships only account for 4% of all of funding for college. And to your point, a lot of it's because a lot of them go unapplied for it. But you also have to pay attention for a family of, when will that kind of scholarship benefit you? And it also depends on how big it is. So if you have a student who spends a lot of time applying to all these little ones and they do all this research, they might get a few of them, but the downside is the college might count them against you. So some of these colleges that give out these big merit and big need awards, they may give you all this money to help you afford school. And so you're thinking, great, I only got $5, $10, $15,000 left. I'm going to get these extra scholarships and fill in the gap. Well, a lot of these schools will take that and say, okay, you've got an extra $15,000 in your own scholarships. We can give you 15 grand less. So they take it out of what you gave them. And so the net cost to you doesn't change. You just put a lot of work in to save the school some money. And so that can be something that's a detriment to the family. But let's say you're looking at a state school that isn't giving you that kind of help, or it's all federal assistance where you're not going to count it against you. Well, in that situation, those kind of scholarships are an excellent help. And doing a lot of research and earning those can be a huge benefit to somebody. So it's not just that their scholarships are going unused, but it's also knowing when and how they can be a benefit to you.
Now, gentlemen, we hear a lot today about STEM, the 4 letters for science, technology, engineering, and math, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, that seems to be big topics, and people are looking in that direction. One, is that true? Subjects, if we had a choice of anything like a buffet to look for. And 2, are there any areas we should stay away from? Because while they sound good, I remember when I was way back in high school, someone was interested in astronomy, and that was the field they were going into, and other people, art history, etc. Are those fields something that would provide us with an opportunity, or is it going to be tougher?
It always depends on how that opportunity marries with the education that a student chooses. So STEM field, yes, those are absolutely rising right now. I mean, all of your robotics, your computer programming, internet security, all the development of the stuff we're using right now, the Zoom, the computers, the microphones, the cameras, the lights, all these things are rapidly developing. Same thing with medical technologies and all the intersections of them, like biomed, where you're having these advanced prosthetics. So there's so many applications in there that count. And so pretty much anywhere in STEM, you're going to find success as long as you apply and you're actually applying yourself within those fields. STEM fields can be exceptionally good. Now, the other misconception is that STEM always requires college. So for instance, a lot of your internet developers, such as, Apple, Google, Facebook, those Microsoft, those kinds of companies, in some cases, they're not even looking for college education anymore. Because if you're going in there for, say, computer programming, they feel that your first 2 years of college is obsolete by the time they get you because of how fast technology changes. And so in their perspective, if you have the right certifications in programming coming out of high school or a 2-year certification right out of high school, they'll take you right then. You don't even have a bachelor's degree. So STEM field is absolutely something to be aware of. But it's also being aware of what education some of these companies are looking for to be able to develop that. But in terms of what to avoid, right now, the things that you're wanting to avoid are things like humanities. And that's kind of sad to say because the humanities are great educations. You're talking about the arts, philosophy, the studies of human interaction and things of that nature. But because of how political those topics have gotten, and how in some cases people will argue that they are getting away from, prescribed sciences in the past, there is an increasing perception in the business world that those jobs do not necessarily apply anymore. Back in the day, you could get a philosophy degree and still get a job in sales or in business or any number of things. But these days, a lot of employers are not seeing that as a valuable education. That's why you always see the heartbreak story on the news about the person who has the drama degree and they have 150 grand in debt and they're a barista. So you see all those kinds of jokes. And so where we're looking at is when you're looking at getting an education, get something that's useful, that has a return on the investment that people are looking for jobs, because these days your degree has to be kind of aligned with what you at least initially look at doing. And if you have a passion for something like the arts, unless you're someone who is truly talented in, like, say, music or something like that, you probably want to consider doing that more as a minor rather than making it a focus and a major.
But if you really love that, I would tell people, look, if that's really what you want to do, go for it. I mean, you really want to follow your passion. but realize you're not going to make a lot of money in it. So definitely do not go into a lot of college debt. Maybe you go to a community college and a state school and it takes you 6-7 years, right? But you're not going into a lot of debt. So you really got to weigh those factors out.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you made it. Justin and Jim, once again, I want our audience to know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Our guests today are Justin and Jim Duncombe, Duncombe. Their book is College Bound Strategies, as you can probably gather from what we're talking about. And gentlemen, where can we get the book, and is there a website where we can find out more?
Yeah, you can get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Lulu.com, anywhere books are sold. If you go to the website, collegeboundstrategies.com, on the website, there's actually a link on there that will take you to some of those popular places you can buy it.
And to our audience, if you like something short, brief, and to the point, it's less than 100 pages. I think you told me before the show, one of the people you recently talked to saved $30,000 a year in their college. And I'm thinking that, hey, if we can save $1,000, $2,000, or $5,000 over 4 years, that's 20. That's better than the raise most of us are going to get. So I'm for it. But I think in terms of an investment, this is better than my guess. And I know nothing, but buying gold, stocks, or virtually anything else, unless you have that perfect real estate property that's right on the main highway and sells McDonald's. So the book, again, College Bound Strategies by our guest, Justin Duncombe. What, in your opinion, is the most overlooked area or option that people just kind of pass by and maybe are unaware of, or maybe due to changes is becoming the point of the future?
And if you're talking about in terms of education, I think we already hit them. STEMs is definitely where you want to be. And you know, the other thing I think people need to understand is accounting, those areas, there are always a lot of jobs in there. In fact, that normally ranks number one in terms of job abilities out there. In terms of in the future, I think it's still going to stick with STEM. I don't see that really changing. In fact, I think that field is going to continue to expand. You know,
I would add on top of that as well. I think the things that are most overlooked by students, especially, in some cases parents, are the high level, what would you would usually call them blue collar jobs. So think of manufacturing. Back in the day, we think of the guy who put the wheels on the car every day for 30 years in the GM plant. Like that was the cliche. Nowadays, that's not what that job is. Now that guy is a robotics operator and he manages an entire fleet of robots. So the guy has robotics backgrounds, programming backgrounds, electrical wiring backgrounds. So that's a very complex job. That job is making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And
you just sold me on it. I want to go out and take a course. So
exactly. Yeah.
Well, then think of the other folks. You know, you have these custom metalwork pieces now that you see with the CNC machines that custom cut wood pieces and custom cut metal pieces to make all sorts of stuff out of lightweight materials. And that's a CNC machiner. So they have to be able to computer aid design the program, you know, plug it in and operate the machinery, change it out, make sure all these things are cut. So you have these custom production shops that make all these things, and these custom manufacturing shops. People overlook those jobs, and those jobs make $70,000, $80,000 coming right out of education. And there are a lot of magnet schools around the country that have CNC machine shops in the high school, and you can get certifications on that in the high school. So those are all sorts of jobs that make really good money. They're not the typical quote unquote lug nut putting a tire on a car type jobs anymore. They're somewhat sophisticated and require, you know, a good amount of skill and earn a good living. And people overlook those jobs.
And some of the basics back, you know, that welding, plumbing. I mean, some of these jobs, they make really big money. And, you know, look at the shortage right now of labor in those skilled construction areas. I mean, there's a lot of, and that's not going to go away either. That's going to probably get bigger and bigger as our society continues to grow. But people need to understand and everybody wants to talk about where the free money comes from. And there are three areas. One is need-based. That means, what can I afford to spend on college? And there's 138 schools give you anywhere from 100% to 90% of that. And you can think of them, all the Ivy Leagues, the Harvard, Stanfords, all those kind of guys, right? And then you got another 1,700 schools that give you both need-based and merit-based. Merit-based is, what did I earn? Did I do real good on my testing? Did I do real good on my grades? And those kinds of things. So that's that area. And then there's a unique ability. Can I, play basketball, football? Do I play hockey? Girls hockey happens to be a pretty good one for scholarships. Do I play the oboe? Very few people do. Big scholarships there. So there's areas those are the three sections that you really want to look at for free money. And that's really what you want to go after, right?
No, exactly. Now, something I read in your book, and I just had never even thought of this. I thought if you went up to a school, and let's use Notre Dame because everybody knows that name. If you go up to Notre Dame and say, oh, I've always wanted to go here. Everybody in my family went here. This is my favorite school. I root for you. Watch your games on TV every week. It's like giving your position away, if I understand you correctly. We almost want to get the schools in competition. Can you explain that and how we do it?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example that has a few other schools on the East Coast. I don't know. Should I name the schools in this example?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one family we were dealing with a couple of years ago was looking at Northeastern, Carnegie Mellon, and Purdue. And when they applied to the schools, Carnegie Mellon and Purdue both came out, we'll give you $0 and $5,000. And then Northeastern was like, oh, we think you're a great fit for our school. We'll give you 40. Now, at the bottom of Purdue's and Carnegie Mellon's offers, they had a caveat in there. If you get offers from other schools, please let us know. So you send the Northeastern offer. All of a sudden, Carnegie Mellon came back with offers of 35 and 38. The schools directly compete with each other in terms of how much they'll give. They also compete with each other in terms of a desired student. So if a school that's highly desirable sees you only have them, because these schools do see who else you apply to, they may not see you as a competition to try and get from another school. But if they see other schools in a similar vein, they start looking at, to some degree, not always, but they start looking at some degree, should I actually try and compete for this student? Clearly, this student thinks they're qualified, especially if they are, because how you come off and how you present yourself is to a degree as much of an important thing as are you actually qualified. So these schools do compete on a financial basis and an acceptance basis.
So just to make that clear to our audience, just by getting the schools competing, and again, I'm going to use even smaller numbers. You're talking very high ones, but even if you can get 3,000 to 5,000 more a year, that's $20,000 over 4 years. That's a yearly income for some people, or
Absolutely.
Certainly a lot of extra part-time work, etc. But just by knowing what you're putting down in your book and knowing the games that the schools play, we can get that much more out of them.
Absolutely. Yep. And the one thing you want to do is you never want to directly ask the schools for money, because, they don't want to think that they don't want to see it that you think you're entitled to their education. In reality, these schools really do want to work with you. And if they think there's a mistake, oftentimes they will do their best to try and, help you out when you're trying to come with them with these kind of problems. So if you approach them more on the line of, well, I have this school, my whole family went here, I really want to go here, but this other school is also a fit and they're making it more affordable. What can I do to be able to better afford this school that I'd prefer, even though this other one is looking more like a better financial choice? Because if you look at the Higher Education Research Institute study that's put out by UCLA, I think it's more than half of students end up choosing their second choice school because of financial situations that make it more appealing. So a lot of students, do make it a financial choice between first and second choice.
Justin and Jim, once again, before we wrap up, I want our audience to know our guest has been Justin and Jim Duncombe, Duncombe. The book is College Bound Strategies. And would you tell us once again, what is the website?
collegeboundstrategies.com.
Easy enough to remember. And my advice to our audience, get hold of this book, or at least take a look at it and write it down, the name and the authors, because someone's going to be talking to you about it, whether it's a relative or maybe you yourself, and you're going to say, what were those guys' names? That sounded so good. You can save so much money and you're not going to remember it. College Bound Strategies by our guests, Justin and James Duncombe. Guys, thanks so much for being with us today, and thanks for making college a lot easier.
You're welcome, Bill. Pleasure.
Thank you, Bill.
I'd like our audience to know that if you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we'll continue our journey to success.